Hello everyone, this is Ashley Tucker. Thank you for joining me today. Today I'm going to be using my Gansai Tambi Watercolors to create some really vibrant backgrounds for two cards. For both of these backgrounds, I started with a piece of Gansai watercolor paper taped down to a board. I always like to tape down my paper to a board when I'm going to watercolor because it helps to prevent the paper from warping. You will still see some warping, especially if you use a lot of water, but it does minimize it. I'm using a piece of white cardstock that I laminated for my palette. Now, when I first started this background, I thought that I wanted to go with kind of a messy look, but I do eventually change my mind and go for more of a smooth watercolor look. After I finished laying down this first layer of paint, I did let the whole thing dry completely before moving on to another layer. I personally really like to use my heat tool to dry my watercoloring in between the layers. I find that when I do this, it kind of protects the paper from losing its tooth. If you've ever watercolored before, you probably understand what I mean by the paper loses its tooth. This is when you've used a lot of water and you've been working on your project for a while, and the actual fibers of the paper start to break down, and you get all these little balls of paper on your work, and I don't think anybody really likes that, so this is what I kind of do to try to prevent that from happening. And you don't have to use a heat tool, you could just let it air dry, but I'm not patient enough for that, so I use a heat tool. I did want these backgrounds to be really dark when they were done, but I always like to start lighter and slowly build up that color to the darker shades. So another good reason to dry in between the layers is it kind of locks in that paint. So when I paint back on top of it, it starts to darken up a little bit more. Also, watercolor always dries lighter than it looks when it's wet, so by drying it in between the layers, you get a better idea of how the actual color is going to look. So as you can see, for this first background, I used some really pretty blue and purple colors. The colors that I used are color numbers 37, 139, 61, 62, and 66. For the second background, I wanted to go with some greens and blues. So for this one, I used color numbers 50, 55, 57, and 67. I like to give the color numbers instead of the color names because with the Gansai Tambi watercolors, the names aren't as accurate as the numbers. I tell you what, I'm always really partial to the purple colors, but I really liked the way that this green background came out. That third color down is probably one of my favorite colors in the Gansai Tambi watercolor set, and that's color number 57, which is like a turquoise green. Don't get me wrong though, I really liked the way the first background came out as well. I was really pleased with both of these backgrounds. So I went really dark with these backgrounds because that was my plan. I thought that they'd look really good with my winter kind of theme, but when I laid down that first layer of the greens, I really loved that really light look on these colors. So I think I might have to do a card in the future where I just do a very light amount of these colors because I really liked that look. Okay, so once both of these backgrounds were done, I very carefully pulled that painter's tape off. I made sure that it was completely dry before I did that because it's a lot easier to rip the paper if it's still wet. I used my tonic trimmer to trim both of the backgrounds down to 5 1/4 by 4. So that's just slightly smaller than an A2 size card base, so there's just going to be a little bit of a border around the edge. Now, as you can see, I'm heat embossing a sentiment onto the backgrounds. I used my Misty tool to stamp a sentiment from the Critter Sweaters stamp set, which is from Simon Says Stamps' Fun and Festive release. I chose the sentiment which says Warm Winter Wishes. I thought that that would work really well with these cool-toned dark backgrounds. I really like to use juxtaposition in my cards, so my thinking process was a cold background and a really warm sentiment. I used some foam tape to mount both of my cards onto some A2 size card bases. I took out this mini snowflakes die set from Fawn, and I cut a whole bunch of snowflakes out of some white cardstock. These dies are really intricate and tiny, so I did have to use a shim when I ran them through my Big Shot. Before gluing them down, I played around with the placement for a little while in order to come up with this layout. Once I was happy with the layout, I started to glue them down, and in order to do that, I used my tweezers, my pick-me-up tool, and my Gina K Connect glue. I had to be very careful with the amount of glue that I put on these because they're very small. Even the smallest dots of glue had the chance to ooze out with these, and I really don't want this glue to ooze out. The Gina K Connect glue does dry clear, but it's not a matte clear, so it's a little shiny. That's not too noticeable, but it is a little bit noticeable, so that's why I really don't want any of the glue to ooze out. If I accidentally put too much glue on the snowflakes, I would dab it off onto a Post-it note to get some of that glue off of it before sticking it to the paper. Next, I added some white half pearls to the centers of some of the snowflakes. I also added a few clear sequins. Now, I did use these sequins when I was planning my layout, so I knew where they were going to go. The last thing that I did to finish up this card is I used my Wink of Stella glitter brush and I went over all of those snowflakes. I sped up the video here quite a bit because this took a decent amount of time. I had to go really slow because I wanted to make sure that I kept the glitter on the snowflakes and didn't get any of it on the background. After that, these cards are all done, and here's a closer look at the finished cards, and you can kind of see that sparkle on the snowflakes. Thank you for watching today. I hope you really enjoyed these card designs featuring the Gansai Tambi Watercolors and the sentiment from Simon Says Stamps Critter Sweaters stamp set. All of the supplies for these cards can be found in the description down below. If you enjoyed watching and you have not subscribed to my channel yet, I would encourage you to hit that subscribe button so that you can see all of my future videos. I'm going to be back with a new video on Monday. Again, thank you for watching. I really appreciate all of you, and I hope you have a great weekend.